Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're stepping away from the noise, from the usual metrics of performance and achievement. We're going inward. We're going to try and map a state of being that I think almost everyone experiences, but we rarely ever really define it.
Yeah, that quiet, sometimes really painful feeling of a deep identity shift.
Exactly. This is a deep dive into that gray area, that in-between space.
It really is a space defined by absence, isn't it? It's that profound discomfort you feel when you finally realize that your old way of being in the world just doesn't work anymore.
Your whole framework.
Your whole psychological framework, the old beliefs, the coping mechanisms, the roles you played, you've outgrown them. But the new one, well, it's not built yet.
And that specific, almost agonizing experience is what we're going to define today as the liminal self.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack that with the kind of rigor our listeners expect.
Yeah.
The sources we've pulled for this they're really vivid. They describe this feeling as this in-between energy, this quiet shift of standing right in the middle of a massive, life-altering transformation. It's not the beginning, where everything is just chaos and you're reacting.
No.
And it's definitely not the end, where you have clarity and you've integrated the change. You're just in the middle.
You are in the middle. It's an interstitial feeling. And if you're really honest with yourself in that state, you can look back maybe 6 months, maybe a year or two.
You don't recognize that person.
You genuinely don't recognize them. The things that used to trigger you, the knee-jerk reactions you had, the ambitions you chased so hard.
You feel alien.
Completely alien. Like they belong to a stranger, but then the future is just as frustrating because the person you're becoming is still hazy. It's not solid yet. It's often incoherent.
There's this core metaphor in the sources that I thought was just brilliant. It captures it so perfectly. It feels like being in a waiting room.
Yeah.
But there's no clock on the wall. Or like your life is just buffering. And that's maddening, especially for an audience that values, structure, progress, data. When you're buffering, there's nothing to measure.
That's the absolute crux of the discomfort. The inability to measure. When we talk about the liminal self, we are talking about a state of pure, unadulterated transition. Your previous identity, what some might call your ego structure, it's actively dissolving.
Right.
But the new, more integrated identity hasn't solidified. It's not strong enough yet to provide stable guidance. And our entire nervous system, our whole cognitive framework, it craves definition.
Who am I? What am I doing?
Where am I going? And when that definition just vanishes, the feeling of restlessness, of being unmoored, it's intense.
And this isn't just like some abstract existential angst, is it? This has real practical consequences. It's disorientation.
It is highly practical because your identity informs every decision you make. If you don't know who you are in this moment, then every choice from, which job to take to what to eat for dinner, it feels loaded. It feels fraught with this uncertainty.
So our mission today is really tailored to that experience, to explore this state, to validate the specific kinds of discomfort, the grief, the fog that come with it, and then, most importantly, to look at strategies for actually sitting in that uncertainty.
Productively sitting in it, understanding that if you rush through it, you bypass the entire point of the transformation.
Okay, so let's begin where the sources suggest we should, and it's with a kind of counterintuitive truth. We're all programmed to see growth as this exhilarating, positive forward motion.
A highlight reel.
Right. But the first major insight here is that growth requires sacrifice. And sacrifice, involves a very real, very subtle kind of sadness. So we have to talk about outgrowing old versions of yourself. We have to talk about the subtle grief of growth.
We really do. We have to challenge that assumption that all forward momentum should feel joyful. The sources really emphasize that psychological growth requires you to acknowledge loss. And loss, by its very definition, requires grief.
We're shedding skins.
We're shedding skins that took immense effort and a long time to build.
So why does that sadness happen? I mean, especially if the old version of you is unhealthy or restrictive.
Yeah.
You're moving towards something better, something freer. Shouldn't it just be a celebration, an escape?
It should be a celebration, yes, but I think only after you acknowledge the complexity of what you gave up. And this is a really crucial psychological distinction to make.
Okay.
Mourning the past self is fundamentally different from wanting to go back to being that person. The grief isn't a sign that you're regressing. It's a required process. It's you acknowledging that something definitive has ended, that something was surrendered, even if that something was a negative protective shell.
That's a huge reframe. It's not about wanting the bad old days back. It's about acknowledging the sacrifice it took to leave the known.
Exactly.
The known. Well, let's get into the specifics of that surrender, because the sources are really practical here. The first detail they point to is letting go of habits that once kept you safe, but now they're aggressively holding you back.
It sounds simple, but in practice, it's so complicated. Because that feeling of safety is arguably the most powerful motivator we have, whether or not that safety is functional or healthy or even real.
Right. It's a feeling.
It's a feeling. So think about the nature of those old habits, the routines, the reactions, the ways you structured your life that were probably established during a really challenging, maybe even a traumatic period in your past.
You needed them to survive whatever was happening.
Precisely. Maybe it was chronic overplanning to control an unpredictable environment, or relentless overworking to prove your worth, or maybe a kind of hyper-independence where you just never, ever asked for help.
Or even something like chronic self-criticism.
Yes, as a way to preempt judgment from others. At the time, that habit served a clear protective function. It was a psychological shield against a very real, perceived threat.
It was your armor. It was functional in that specific, maybe dangerous environment.
And now hopefully you're in a healthier, more stable environment. And that armor is it's heavy, it's restrictive, it clanks around, it prevents real connection, it prevents rest, it prevents vulnerability.
So you decide to take it off.
You consciously decide to shed it, to stop over-planning every minute, to stop criticizing yourself into oblivion. And the moment you do, you feel completely exposed.
Terrified.
Instantly. The grief isn't a love for the heavy armor. It's an acute, painful reaction to the missing perceived security that the armor gave you. You are literally exchanging the known, restrictive certainty of the old way for the unknown, terrifying freedom of the new way.
So the sadness we feel is directly proportional to the amount of vulnerability we're choosing to accept.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. You're grieving the loss of a predictable outcome, even if that outcome was consistently negative.
Because at least I knew it was coming?
At least you knew. The deeper, more subconscious part of your brain, your nervous system, it registers the loss of a survival strategy. It's screaming, wait a minute, I knew exactly how to survive in that old structure. It was miserable, but it guaranteed my existence. I have no idea how to survive in this new, open, free space.
And that primal fear that manifests as grief for the very structure you're trying to dismantle.
It does.
And this connects directly to the second detail the sources bring up, which is this often shocking realization that your old coping mechanisms just don't work anymore, those quick fixes you used to rely on.
Oh, that failure creates an intense, immediate, practical discomfort. It's a personal crisis point, and it can happen multiple times a week when you're in this phase.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine your established response to stress or conflict has always been to, say, numb out by scrolling on your phone for hours, or to engage in a really critical internal monologue, beating yourself up, or maybe lashing out defensively to create distance from someone.
Right, the go-to moves.
For years, those mechanisms delivered a certain unhealthy but predictable immediate relief. They paused the painful feeling for a little while.
They were reliable, a familiar path to, even if it was a damaging kind of relief.
They were a predictable circuit breaker. But as you do the real work of growth, as your emotional intelligence deepens, or maybe your environment changes, like you enter a healthy relationship where lashing out isn't tolerated anymore, these old habits start to fail. Spectacularly. They end up creating far more pain and complication than they solve. The old circuit breaker now just trips the entire system.
So when you reach for that old familiar reaction, the sarcasm, the withdrawal, the overthinking, and it just provides nothing, just this hollow echo, maybe a fresh wave of shame, that must feel profoundly destabilizing.
It is destabilization in real time, because you are left abruptly to face the raw, unprocessed emotion that the coping mechanism was expertly designed to suppress.
And you haven't built a new one yet.
Yeah. The new, healthier coping mechanism, like pausing, breathing, communicating consciously, it's still being learned. It's not automatic. So you're standing right in that gap, feeling the full, unprocessed weight of the stressor.
Wow.
That specific, hollow discomfort when a habitual reaction fails. It's one of the clearest signals, emotionally and physically, that a genuine transformation is actually happening.
And the sources also talk powerfully about mourning for simplicity, missing regions of yourself that felt less complicated, even if they weren't, objectively healthier.
Yes.
I think that's an insight that just it resonates with anyone who's done this kind of deep personal work, that feeling of, God, I just wish things were easier again.
Well, when we were that simpler self, we were dealing with fewer variables. Our worldview might have been narrower, our emotional range less nuanced. Our responsibilities, both internal and external, were often more strictly defined. Complexity, while it's undeniably a sign of advanced psychological growth, is also cognitively exhausting.
So if the past self was purely reactive, just driven by instinct and unchecked emotion, that reaction, even if it was destructive, it was simple, it was effortless.
Exactly.
But now the new self has to pause, analyze everything, process multiple angles, and then choose a conscious, integrated response.
That requires immense sustained cognitive effort. It's what we call executive function. So the mourning for simplicity is often a mourning for the lack of effort that was required in the past.
It's an honest admission.
It's admitting, I kind of miss the days when I didn't know better, because not knowing better meant I could operate on autopilot. And autopilot was just less work. The grown self is always more effortful than the reactive self.
So it's like we're trading this effortless survival for a very effortful kind of thriving.
Yeah.
And at first, that trade-off is just pure exhaustion.
It is. And the temptation to just collapse back into that simplicity is huge. And
Right.
this is where the sources reframe the mourning so beautifully. It's not about reverting. It's about offering sincere gratitude to that past self.
Okay, why gratitude? That feels like a tough one. If the old self made bad choices or carried toxic baggage, why do they deserve thanks? Doesn't that risk, enabling those old patterns?
That's a critical question. It gets right at the tension of self-compassion. But the gratitude isn't for the flaws of the past self. It's for their endurance. That
yeah.
past self, with all their limitations, their misguided coping mechanisms, their flaws, they navigated circumstances that were often overwhelming, and they made the best decisions they could with the tools they had at the time.
And those decisions got you here.
Those decisions successfully delivered you, the current self, to this very moment where transformation is finally possible. Without their endurance, you wouldn't even be here to have this conversation.
Thank you for getting me here. It changes the grief from being this gravitational pull backwards into a solid, reflective anchor that helps you move forward.
It grounds the entire experience. It mitigates the guilt. And for the learner, it's crucial to recognize that this emotional acknowledgement isn't a detour. It's a necessary part of defining the new identity. You can't truly build the new framework until you've respectfully decommissioned and grieved the old one.
That sadness we feel. It's just the sound of the old structure coming down.
Exactly.
Okay, so once we acknowledge that grief, once we honor the past self, we enter this second phase. We move from the internal dismantling to this external social disorientation, what the sources call the identity fog.
The identity fog, it's the visible external manifestation of that lack of internal structure we were just talking about. In phase one, you were mourning the internal loss of safety and habits.
Right.
In this phase, you feel the effects of the external loss of definition, of roles, of labels.
And it begins with this really specific, unnerving feeling you alluded to earlier. Not knowing how to describe yourself anymore.
The existential crisis of labels. We are social creatures. We rely on clear, concise labels for social efficiency and for our own self-definition. Think about what you tell people at a party or in a job interview.
Or even just yourself in your own head.
Yes, I am a successful lawyer. I am an artist. I am a devoted parent. I am a driven entrepreneur. These labels anchor our identity. They guide our behavior because they tell us what is expected of people like us.
And when you start to fundamentally change in your values, your priorities, your interests, those labels start to feel incredibly thin or just completely ill-fitting, like a costume you were forced to wear.
And that's when your internal monologue becomes vague. It becomes contradictory. You go to say, I am a, and the word just catches in your throat.
Yeah.
Because the old identity tied to that word, the old work ethic, the old social priorities, the old definition of success, it doesn't apply to you anymore. The external label might still be there technically, but the internal meaning has just evaporated. It's a hollow shell.
And this happens across the board, right? It makes the whole world feel blurry. Your career, your hobbies, your relationship status, your politics.
Everything. You feel deeply disconnected from the labels you used to claim with such confidence.
And that disconnection creates the fog.
It does, because it makes communication unstable. If you can't confidently describe who you are today, you can't project a coherent future self to others or even to yourself. And this is paralyzing. Our culture demands certainty from us.
Absolutely. So what's next for you?
And the only honest answer in the identity fog is, I'm genuinely not sure. And that answer often feels so socially unacceptable that we end up just making something up, putting on a brave face.
And that social uncertainty, that pressure, it bleeds directly into our personal sense of stability. It throws our future plans into chaos. We start questioning our direction, our pace.
This is a massive destabilizer for the kind of person who thrives on actionable goals and clear milestones. The things you wanted so badly before, that promotion, that specific house, that kind of relationship, they can suddenly seem utterly irrelevant.
Or just wrong, actively wrong for the
Yeah.
person you're becoming.
Right.
But why does that happen? Was the original desire a lie? Were we just fooling ourselves?
Not necessarily fraudulent, but it was likely rooted in the needs of your old identity. The old self might have wanted success based on external validation or cultural expectations from family or
It was
peers.
up with the Joneses.
Exactly. But as you grow, your core values shift. They move from external measures like status and money to internal ones like authenticity and meaning. And suddenly, that goal that was supposed to make you feel successful is revealed to be a goal designed to impress an old version of your parents or a high school rival.
Or just your old restrictive self.
Yeah.
You realize the ladder you spent 10 years climbing was leaning against the wrong building.
Perfect metaphor. And you're halfway up and you realize you hate the view. And because you're not sure where the right building even is, you start aggressively questioning your pace.
Right. I should be further along. I should have this figured out by now.
But you can't move forward because the current goals feel hollow. They belong to a stranger. And that internal contradiction, that feeling of constant inadequacy, is what fuels that untethered sensation.
The sources use this incredible visceral image to describe the feeling. It's like you're shedding skin, but you haven't grown the new one yet. I want to spend some time on that feeling of vulnerability.
That image just captures the extreme sensory experience of it. When a snake sheds its skin, it's in this raw, exposed, almost blind state. Its defenses are totally down. It has to hide until the new skin hardens.
Okay.
For humans in this identity transition, that rawness translates to measurable effects. Heightened sensitivity to everything, a lower tolerance for minor setbacks, overthinking every bit of criticism, and just the physical exhaustion of having no psychological defense mechanism, no new skin to handle the friction of daily life.
So the new identity isn't robust enough yet. The internal structure is gone. The external definition is gone. And you're just an exposed, sensitive nerve.
Exactly. And that vulnerability, as painful as it is essential for the transformation to actually stick.
How so?
Because that exposed state forces a deep, radical honesty. You can't hide behind the old labels or the old destructive coping mechanisms anymore because they literally don't work. The process of growing the new identity, the new skin, requires you to absorb the world without your old filters. It is painful, it's confusing, but it is absolutely necessary.
It means you're fully present.
Yeah.
You're processing everything, even the hard stuff.
You are.
So if we were to summarize this phase, the core statement of the identity fog is something like, I know I'm fundamentally changing. I just have no idea into what or where or how fast.
Mm-hmm. And that lack of clarity creates the sensation of being completely untethered.
You've lost your bearings.
You're drifting in this vast psychological ocean, but, and this is a crucial distinction, you are not drifting aimlessly. You are drifting between definitions. And for anyone who values structure and a clear path, accepting this temporary incoherence, it's maybe the hardest challenge of the whole process. Your brain is being asked to tolerate ambiguity when it is hardwired for certainty.
Which brings us perfectly to the practical, action-oriented part of this. The behavioral shift required to manage this. Once you've acknowledged the grief, once you recognize the fog, the challenge is how to sit in that discomfort
Productively.
and resist that urgent, agonizing rush to clarity that our culture just screams at us to find.
That rush to clarity is a survival mechanism. It's rooted in our psychological need to reduce cognitive dissonance. Our brains just hate the conflict inherent in the liminal self, this contradiction of being both here and not here, both past and future. We instinctively want a neat, quick solution to restore order.
Of course.
But the sources are so clear that the real discipline required here is in specifically enduring the fog.
And the first barrier to that is this overwhelming cultural narrative around change. As the source notes, society loves the before and after.
Oh, absolutely.
But it actively ignores or even stigmatizes the messy middle.
The messy middle is where, I would argue, 99% of the real work happens. Society, and especially, social media, a lot of self-help platforms,
Yeah.
advertising, they value instantaneous transformation, the dramatic 3-month reveal, makeover montage. It
Yeah.
fuels this illusion that growth is linear, that it's rapid, and critically, that it's visually appealing.
We see the testimonial. I was unhappy, and now I'm a millionaire entrepreneur with a six-pack.
Yeah.
We never see the 3 years of confusion, the intense doubt, the failed experiments, the painful arguments that happen in that dark, messy middle.
Because the messy middle is slow, it's nonlinear, and it is not photogenic. And this societal pressure, it imposes this artificial, punishing timeline on our internal transformation. We internalize this message that if we're confused, or if we're pausing, or if we haven't produced a shiny external result yet, then we're doing it wrong.
Or worse, that we're failing as a person.
Yes, and that pressure is so toxic, it forces a premature rush to define the after, which almost always leads to superficial healing, or you just adopt another ill-fitting label that hasn't been fully earned or integrated into your core self.
So the key practice here is resistance.
Yeah.
And action 1 is resisting that urge to rush the healing, to force a resolution. Let's get into the mechanism of why rushing is so damaging.
Rushing healing is like demanding a plant sprout roots and flowers on the very same day. It might satisfy our impatience, but it destroys the potential for deep, sustainable growth.
Okay.
When we feel pressured to solve the identity crisis quickly, to know our purpose right now, it activates the older, more primal parts of the brain, specifically the limbic system, which controls fight, flight, or freeze.
So the stress response just kicks in.
The stress response kicks in. And the limbic system is excellent at solving immediate, external, black and white threats. But it is terrible at nuanced self-reflection, emotional processing, and deep value alignment. That's the work of the prefrontal cortex.
The reflective mind.
Right. So by rushing, we engage the reactive mind and we shut down the reflective mind. And we end up trying to build the new house on the shaky, unprocessed foundation of the old, crumbling one.
You end up just carrying all that unprocessed emotional baggage and rigid thinking right into your new identity.
You do. It makes the new identity brittle and unstable. True healing requires slow integration. It requires a willingness to look at the broken pieces, even if they're painful to examine.
Which leads right into action 2, allowing confusion to exist without forcing immediate clarity. This is about cultivating a high tolerance for ambiguity.
And that goes against everything our analytical brains tell us to do.
Everything. We want to solve the puzzle.
We do. But confusion is not a void, it is active data collection. When you feel confused, it means your current psychological framework is insufficient to process the complexity of the reality you're now facing.
So it's a signal?
It's a signal. To allow confusion to exist means you're giving your system the time it needs to gather new information, to test new assumptions, and to organically build a better, more nuanced framework. If you force clarity too soon, you almost always default to the easiest, most familiar answer.
Which is usually a variation of the old, restrictive pattern you were trying to escape in the first place.
Precisely.
So confusion is evidence of progress, not evidence of stagnation. That profoundly reframes the whole experience of feeling lost.
It's a vital reframe. We equate being lost with being stuck or making a mistake. But in the context of the liminal self, being lost is an active, essential phase of transformation. It's like a seed that's been planted underground. It has lost its original protective form, but it hasn't reached the sun yet. It's busy underground, rearranging its own structure, sending out exploratory roots, collecting nutrients. That internal, subterranean work is invisible, but it is the most critical part of becoming.
Let's focus on that for a second. The invisible nature of transformation. That the essential change is quiet and unseen.
The most profound shifts, they always occur beneath the surface, in the unconscious, habitual layers of our being. This is about changes in microreactions.
What do you mean by that?
It's how you process a minor setback. Do you still spiral into self-criticism, or do you now analyze it neutrally? It's how you handle a moment of unexpected criticism from someone. Do you collapse, or do you get curious? It's the internal calculus you use to decide where to spend your energy or where to finally draw a boundary.
And those shifts in thinking, in reacting, in desiring, they're often hidden from the outside world. And sometimes they're even hidden from our own immediate awareness because they're so subtle.
That is exactly why external measures feel so useless in the fog. We have to stop measuring progress purely by external benchmarks. The new job, the new relationship, the dramatic life overhaul. Sitting in the discomfort means respecting that the deepest work is happening quietly.
So the best thing you can do is often nothing.
It's to wait, to allow, to observe the internal changes without demanding immediate, visible, external proof that you're making progress.
Okay, that brings us to the final, and I think the most hopeful section of this deep dive. Trusting the becoming. Shifting the tone here toward acceptance and a kind of positive forward momentum within this ambiguity.
Yes, if the last section was about resistance, resisting the urge to rush, resisting old habits, this section is about surrender. Surrendering to the natural timeline of authentic psychological growth.
And the sources are so clear on the mechanism for this. Clarity comes with time, not with pressure. Let's just reiterate why pressure actively blocks the very clarity we're so desperate for.
Well, like we just discussed, pressure activates anxiety and the reactive mind. I want you to think of clarity not as a specific answer you find, but as the quiet hum of your deepest values aligning with your actions.
Oh, a quiet hum. I like that.
When you are under pressure, like a self-imposed deadline to figure out your next career move by Friday, the anxiety from that pressure just drowns out that quiet hum.
So it's forcing an outcome, telling yourself, I must commit to this new identity right now or I'm a failure, that just triggers a wave of anxiety that makes the deep, honest self-listening totally impossible.
It actually delays genuine understanding. Clarity is not a destination you sprint towards. It's an emergent property. It emerges from prolonged, honest presence in that middle space. It's a byproduct of having honored the grief, sat through the fog, and allowed all that subterranean work to proceed without you constantly interfering.
This speaks so directly to the virtue of self-patience. But how do we cultivate that patience when our internal clock, driven by society and our own need for certainty, is just screaming, hurry up?
We have to fundamentally reframe the discomfort itself. Stop seeing the restlessness and the confusion as signs that you're failing or stagnating. Instead, recognize that the discomfort is actively doing something for you.
It's the engine of change.
It is. The anxiety you feel when an old habit fails, that is the friction that is breaking down the old, rigid structures of the self that are no longer serving you.
So the pain and the unmoored feeling we have, it's actually the demolition crew, actively clearing this site so a new, healthier structure can be built.
Precisely. And if we try to eliminate that friction or that pain too quickly by just adopting a new, rigid set of rules, we stop the demolition prematurely. And we risk moving into a new phase that's just as restrictive as the old one.
So being patient means accepting the necessary inconvenience of deconstruction.
It's acknowledging that this feeling of restless, unmoored floating is actually evidence of intense, active, deep internal processing. You are not stalling, you are processing.
And this leads to a really practical action item for the liminal self, learning to let yourself rest while you're becoming. This sounds so paradoxical when the entire self-improvement industry tells us that transformation requires intense hustle.
But this kind of rest is not idleness, and it is certainly not passive avoidance. It is downtime that is necessary for integration, and that is a biological and a psychological mandate.
What do you mean?
Think of your mind as running a massive software update. The bulk of the installation happens quietly in the background, but the system needs to shut down and reboot. That's the rest, to fully integrate the new software without crashing.
Right.
If you keep forcing high productivity, high external performance, or intense hustling during that critical integration phase, you risk corrupting the file or crashing the whole system.
So rest, in this context, is about honoring the hidden work. It's giving your nervous system and your psyche explicit permission to integrate all these new shifts in thinking and feeling without the immediate pressure to produce a visible result.
Yes, and that ties into what I think is the most crucial directive for navigating this whole state. You don't need to have all the answers right now. You just need to stay present.
Why is presence, focusing on this moment rather than the future destination, so important when everything feels so ambiguous?
Because the answers for your future self, they aren't located in your anxieties and your projections about the future. And they're certainly not located in the definitions of your past. The seeds of your new identity can only be found in the reality of the present moment. In your immediate feelings, your current physical environment, the small tasks right in front of you. When you are truly present, you are finally able to hear that quiet hum of your true values.
So if I stop fixating on this enormous, unsolvable question of what is my grand purpose in life, and I just focus on the quality of my presence right now, how can I move through this conversation honestly and kindly? The direction starts to emerge from that.
The direction reveals itself naturally through action, not through rumination. Trusting the becoming means accepting that temporary, messy loss of identity structure, the fog in favor of an authentic, slow emergence. You're trading rigid control for a deeper, more rooted, and more integrated transformation.
This has been such a profound and I think necessary exploration of what we so often just dismiss as, transition fatigue or burnout. We really peeled back the layers on the mechanism of growth itself.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground today. We started by validating that subtle grief that comes with outgrowing past versions of ourselves, those habits and coping mechanisms that, even though they were restrictive, once gave us a sense of safety.
And we acknowledge that mourning them is necessary. It's not regression, it's deconstruction.
Then we explore the disorientation of the identity fog, the crisis of labels that leaves us feeling socially and internally untethered.
And that intense vulnerability that comes with feeling like we shed our old skin, but we haven't grown the new one yet. We established that lack of clarity is actually vital data for our system.
And crucially, we discussed the practice of resistance. Resisting that cultural pressure of the before and after story, and finding the discipline to let confusion exist as an active state of processing.
We learned that being lost is a productive part of transformation, not a bug, and that the most essential work is quiet and invisible, happening beneath the surface.
And finally, we shifted to trusting the becoming, understanding that clarity is emergent, it's not forced, and that the discomfort we feel is actually the old structures breaking down to make space for the new.
With the action items being rest, integration, and presence, not more output.
And if we go back to that powerful reflection that anchored our sources today, it provides the perfect summary for this liminal state. I'm not who I was, and I'm not who I'm becoming yet.
And the final liberating insight from that is that this middle space, it matters just as much as the before or the after. It's not wasted time. It is the most fertile ground. It is the space where one learns to slow down, to listen, to trust myself again.
That phrase, learning to trust yourself again, that is the ultimate goal of the liminal phase. The old self was defined by external measures, external approval, external benchmarks. The new self has to be defined by internal alignment, internal congruence, and internal trust. If you can't hear yourself in the quiet of that middle space, you can't authentically define yourself in the next chapter.
So as we close out this deep dive, let's leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on this idea of internal listening and self-trust. If transformation is quiet and invisible, and if the path forward really requires patience and presence, what single small habit, one that feels more like rest or listening or gentle observation than actual work, what small habit could you start today to honor the process of trusting your becoming self?
It could be as simple as giving yourself 5 minutes of quiet, device-free transition time between finishing work and starting your evening. It could be just pausing before you react to an email or to your own internal critic. It could be actively choosing a hobby you enjoy without any need to monetize it or perfect it. Whatever it is, that small, non-performing act of slowing down and listening, that is the real productive work of the liminal self.
This might be something. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.